Hi. Area of Study 1 refers to the body of music created in the Western world over a period of about 300 years, from 1600 to 1899. To make things simple, we tend to divide up this time into three distinct eras: the Baroque era, the Classical era, and the Romantic era. Now clearly, people at the time had no idea they were living in the Baroque era or the Romantic era, but we've since looked back and found certain common features in the worlds of music and art and literature and architecture, and we've given them those names. Over this 300-year period, many musical instruments as we know them today were being invented, along with various formations of musical ensemble like the orchestra and the string quartet. Composers developed many forms of music composition that would be performed by these different ensembles, like the symphony, performed by an orchestra, the solo sonata, which is performed by one solo performer on one instrument, and the concerto, which is performed by one instrument and accompanied by a whole orchestra. These compositions would often be lengthy affairs consisting of several pieces called movements. Many vocal forms were also developed, such as the opera and the oratorio. In Area of Study 1, there are three set works that we need to listen to and study. Each one is taken from the three eras that I mentioned earlier, the Baroque, Classical and Romantic eras. Our first set work is from the Baroque era. Now, Baroque is the Portuguese word for pearl, and it represents the ornate and elaborate style in art and architecture at the time. Now, the music in the Baroque era had certain common features. For example, the melodies were decorated with lots of ornamentation. There were various textures used, such as monophonic, homophonic, and polyphonic textures, especially polyphonic, where melodies are interweaving among each other. And the basso continuo was often very common. This is where you have a continuous bass line with chords underneath played by a keyboard instrument like the harpsichord or the church organ. And the orchestra also played a big part in the music of the time, but the orchestra at that time would have been much smaller than the ones we see today. Now, despite the complexity of these interweaving melodies and the different textures used, the pieces would often be written to portray just one mood or affection. The most famous composers of this era are Johann Sebastian Bach, George Frederick Handel, Henry Purcell, Antonio Vivaldi, but the composer that we are studying in this set work is Handel. So, some facts about Handel then. George Frederick Handel was born in Germany in 1685. When Handel was 22 years old, he had his first serious opera performed in Florence. 3 years later, he got the job of Kapellmeister to the Elector of Hanover in Germany. So what is the Kapellmeister? Well, people obviously didn't have iPods in those days, and if you were rich enough, you could hire somebody to be your personal musician. And that's what the Elector of Hanover did. He hired Handel to be the Kapellmeister, which is the master musician. As part of his role as Kapellmeister, Handel had the opportunity to spend 1 year in London, and he loved it here so much that he ended up staying here the rest of his life. Now, if you know your history, then you'll know that around this time, the Elector of Hanover, who to his friends was George Ludwig, became the King of England, George I. And this was great for Handel because he was able to continue his work for him as the royal composer in England. It was in London during this time that Handel composed some of his finest works, including Water Music, which was a piece to accompany the King's triumphant procession up the River Thames, and, of course, the Messiah. The Messiah is probably one of Handel's most famous works, and it's about the birth, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Messiah is an oratorio, and an oratorio is very similar to an opera or even a musical, except there is no acting in an oratorio and the story would be taken from a story from the Bible. If you've ever been to a musical, then you'll know that the musical contains many different kinds of songs. There are solo songs just for one singer. There are kind of filler songs that you don't necessarily remember very well, but they tell you what's happening in the story. And then there are big chorus numbers where everyone sings together. Now there are a few words to remember here. So, in an oratorio, the solo songs are called arias. The big chorus numbers, this is easy, it's choruses. And the filler songs that come in between and tell you the story are called recitatives. Now, Handel's Messiah is quite long, and you'll be pleased to know that you don't have to study the entire oratorio. We are studying one of the choruses from the Messiah. It's called "And the Glory of the Lord," and in later videos we're going to be looking at this in more detail. Okay, bye!